April 14, 1943. Fleet Radio, Unit Pacific, Pearl Harbor. The codebreakers at their desks. A pencil scraped across paper as intercepted Japanese Navy groups became clear English. The origin line, Commander-in-Chief, Combined Fleet. Subject, inspection tour schedule for Admiral Yamamoto. A full itinerary with precise arrival times at forward bases. Departure, 0600 Tokyo time on April 18th from Rabaul. Arrival, Balalai Airfield, 0800 Tokyo time. 2 Type 1 medium bombers assigned for transport. Fighter Escort, 60 aircraft. Technical Sergeant Harold Fudena, a Nisei linguist with the Military Intelligence Service, checked his rendering against the raw cipher again. Japanese planning habits had handed over unusual precision, exact times, exact aircraft, exact routes. Commander William Goggins, running FRUPAC, saw the weight of the message instantly. Within minutes, the translation sat on the desk of Commander Edwin Layton, Pacific Fleet Intelligence Chief. His eyes widened as he did the math. Isoroku Yamamoto, the mind behind Pearl Harbor, would slip into American fighter range for one narrow window. No one in the room yet knew this single decrypt would set off the boldest fighter interception of the war. By now, the Pacific fight had taught Americans that some Japanese officers were more than commanders. They were emblems. Break the emblem and morale cracks across a fleet. Yamamoto was larger than a job title. Harvard-educated, well-traveled, a cool poker player, he understood the United States better than any of his peers. His warnings about U.S. industry had gone unheeded. He had argued against war, but once ordered, he planned Pearl Harbor with cold arithmetic, took early tactical wins, and nearly forced a decisive result at Midway, until American codebreakers flipped the script. On Guadalcanal's Fighter Strip No. 2, Henderson Field, a Lockheed P-38G Lightning, waited. Twin Allison V-1710 89-91 engines could push it to 4 F-14 Barber at 25,000 feet. Twin booms stretching aft to a 52-foot tailplane. A central nacelle carried pilot and guns, 4 Browning 50s, and a Hispano M2 20mm cannon clustered in the nose, removing the headaches of wing gun convergence. With 2 165-gallon drop tanks added to 300 gallons internal, the Lightning could fight more than 450 miles from base. Nothing else American in the Pacific could go that far. Major John William Mitchell, CO of the 339th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group, stood in the ops dugout, skimming weather and intel. With over 2,000 hours in everything from trainers to frontline types, he ran the problem like a navigator's computer. Guadalcanal to the intercept, 435 miles on a straight line. But a straight line meant flying past Japanese-held islands alive with radar and coast watchers. A sea-skimming dogleg far offshore, then north, added 165 miles, 600 out, 400 home, 1,000 miles total, with maybe 7 minutes of war emergency combat in the fuel budget. The numbers were brutal. Standard P-38G internal fuel, 300 gallons in mains, 60 in reserves. 2 165-gallon tanks added, 330 more. Total 6 to 90 gallons. Crews burn roughly 50 gallons per hour per engine down low, higher at altitude and power. Best case endurance a touch under 5 hours 45 minutes. Required time in the air, at least 4 hours 30 minutes if they nailed the navigation and hit no delays. Allow for maneuvering and headwinds, and the margin vanished. Captain Thomas George Lanier Jr. had memorized the profile until it lived behind his eyes. Son of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Lanier Sr., a decorated Great War airman who had served with Billy Mitchell, the younger Lanier, mixed stick and rudder talent with instincts for the spotlight. Tall, broad-shouldered, naturally commanding, he had 5 claims, some disputed. Aggressive flying and a knack for self-promotion split opinions in the squadron. At 27, he saw the Yamamoto strike as a road to fame and a post-war career. First Lieutenant Rex Theodore Barber was a different mold. An Oregon farm kid and Oregon State engineering student before enlisting in September 1940, Barber flew like a mechanic with a slide rule, quiet, precise, efficient. Where Lanier chased renown, Barber chased clean solutions. His confirmed kills came from position and aim, not showy aerobatics. At 25, he could picture 3-dimensional fights with unusual clarity. His method was an engineer's: calculate, weigh risk, place shots where they counted. At Lakunai Airfield in Rabaul, aboard Mitsubishi G4M1 Type 1 Betty, number 323, Admiral Yamamoto reviewed the tour plan with staff. The Betty's 2,150-mile reach came from ruthless trade-offs: almost no armor and no self-sealing tanks. Max speed 265 up at 19,085 feet, cruise about 200. Crews called it Hamaki cigar, or Type 1 lighter, for how fast it burned when hit. For this trip, 6 A6M3 Model 32 Zeros of the 204th Air Group would ride shotgun. At 59, Yamamoto was still Japan's sharpest strategist. Born Isoroku Takano and later adopted into the Yamamoto family, he stood only 5'3" but carried the posture of a samurai's heir. His left hand still showed Tsushima, May 27, 1905. Index and middle fingers lost to Russian shrapnel when a turret blew on armored cruiser Nishin. The injury never dulled his love of calligraphy, his poker face, or the authority he projected. From 1919 to 1921 at Harvard, he hitchhiked across America. Auto plants in Detroit, oil in Texas, aircraft in California. He came away convinced a war with the U.S. could not be won, and said so. Japan might run wild for 6 months. Beyond that, no confidence. The American plan depended on signals intelligence staying invisible. If Tokyo smelled a compromise, they would scrub or shift the flight. Station Haipo, now Frupass, had been grinding on JN-25 variants since before Midway, moving from fragments to near-complete reads, but every use of that knowledge risked giving the game away. Approving action on the Yamamoto intercept needed Admiral Chester Nimitz, Admiral William Bull Halsey in the South Pacific, Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher for the Solomons, and ultimately President Franklin Roosevelt, who supposedly said, "Get Yamamoto." Planning the grab took a stack of officers working in step. Marine Major John Condon at Commander, Aircraft Solomons drafted the first flight plan. Fuel figures and waypoints included. Mitchell tossed it, finding speeds and timing wrong for P-38 realities, then rebuilt everything from zero with his pilots overnight to squeeze detection risk and boost success odds. The final route had 5 exact legs, each chosen to thread between radar arcs while trimming for wind and compass error. Intel pointed to several breaks in their favor. The date, April 18th, was the Doolittle Raid's first anniversary. Rich symbolism. Forecasts promised scattered clouds and good vis. Most of all, Japanese traffic showed no hint their codes were blown. Patterns looked normal. If surprise held, it would be total. The Zero escort was the sticky part that ate planning time. The A6M3 Model 32 could outturn a P-38 at low and middle altitudes. Top speed, 336 mph at 19,685 feet, about 3,100 feet per minute climb, and a turn radius under 1,000 feet. It bought those gifts with extreme lightness, 3,980 pounds empty, versus the P-38's 12,080. No pilot armor beyond a sliver of glass. No self-sealing tanks. Structure paired to the line. In a flat, low-altitude turning fight, a Zero chewed up a Lightning. In a fast-diving slash using heavier guns and stronger airframe, the P-38 held the cards. Lieutenant Besby Frank Holmes had pored over Zero habits through his Solomon's tour. Escorts usually sat 1,500 feet above and a bit behind in 2 3-ship chains. Doctrine said pounce on any attackers while the bombers pressed on under speed and defensive guns. But intel also flagged a tell. If surprised, Japanese formations often reacted slowly to attacks from odd angles, especially from below and behind. The only way this worked was if 18 Lightnings crossed 600 miles of sunlit ocean unseen and still arrived undetected. April 17, 1943, 2,000 hours. The tent briefing was packed. Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, Commander Air Solomons, spoke to the pilots himself. He had pushed naval aviation forward and had skippered USS Hornet during the Doolittle raid 1 year earlier. He knew the stakes. 18 P-38s would go. 4 killer ships would hit the bombers. 12 would ride top cover against a scramble from Kahili. Some 700+ fighters on paper. 2 more were spares for mechanical gremlins. The killer 4, Captain Lanier, Lieutenant Barber, Lieutenant Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond K. Hine. Spares, Lieutenants James McClanahan and Joe Moore. Mitchell's nav plan showed both genius and the hard lessons of long overwater flying. Leg 1, magnetic 2x degrees for 55 minutes at 50 feet, 183 miles. Leg 2, 290 degrees for 27 minutes, 89 miles. Leg 3, 305 degrees for 38 minutes, 125 miles. Leg 4, 330 degrees for 16 minutes, 52 miles. Leg 5, 290 degrees for 21 minutes and a climb to attack height, 70 miles. Each leg skirted New Georgia, Vela La Vela, and the Treasury Islands eyes and radar. While trimming for forecast winds, there was 0 room for drift. A 1-degree miss held over distance would dump them miles off with no fuel to hunt. Survival gear told its own story. Mae West preservers for ditching. Sharks made that a thin hope. Jungle kits, purification tabs, rations, line, first aid, in case of bailout over Bougainville. Each pilot carried a Colt M19 along a 1.45 with spare mags, with the grim knowledge that capture meant execution more often than not. Reports on downed airmen spoke of beheadings, unanesthetized experiments, and confirmed cannibalism. Run dry over water, die by exposure or sharks. Break down over enemy land, face worse. Weather officer Lieutenant Col Luther S. Moore gave the last read. Surface winds, southeast 8 knots. At 5,000 feet, south at 15. At 10,000, southwest at 22. Solomon weather was fickle. A storm anywhere on the path could kill the mission. Even a bit more headwind could empty tanks before home. He put good conditions at 70%, but everyone knew clouds could tower from nowhere in under an hour. Radio silence would be absolute to contact. SCR-274N sets were retuned to 6,610 kilocycles, unlikely for Japanese eavesdroppers. But any call could give them away. Mitchell would carry the group purely by dead reckoning. Compass, airspeed, clock, and brain. No beacons. No landmarks over unbroken swells except islands they had to avoid. 18 planes would either find a moving needle in the Pacific or vanish. Lieutenant Julius Jack Jacobson ran one last weapons check, 4 50s with 500 rounds each. linked belts of M2 ball, M1 incendiary, and M2 AP. Cyclic 750, 850 per minute per gun. The 20 millimeters carried 150 rounds of HE and AP. All that fire focused in the nose made a fist-sized kill zone that could tear a spar in seconds. But at max rate, the 50s gave under 37 seconds total, the cannon under 12. Every burst had to matter. Before dawn on April 18th, crew chiefs ran the final prep. Master Sergeant Leo B. Godfrey oversaw arming, every round seated, every link smooth. Tanks brimmed with 100 octane, internals to 360 gallons, drops verified at 160 each. Belts loaded in a 4-to-1 mix of ball, AP, and incendiary. Drop tank shackles triple-checked. One bad release could ruin a sortie or kill a pilot with drag. Oil, hydraulics, controls, green across the board. At Rabaul, the 11th Air Fleet followed iron rules for VIP transport. Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka, Southeast Area Fleet, had argued against the tour. U.S. fighter activity had surged around Bougainville after the February pullout from Guadalcanal. Reports put nearly 200 American fighters on Guadalcanal, the Russells, and forward strips. Yamamoto insisted on going. He wanted to congratulate the flyers of Operation Why-Go, the recent offensive that claimed wildly padded totals against U.S. shipping. 1 cruiser, 2 destroyers, and 25 transports sunk in reports. The real losses were 1 destroyer, 1 corvette, 1 tanker, and 2 freighters. Chief Petty Officer Hiroshi Hayashi readied Yamamoto's Betty at Lakunai, tail 323 of the 705th Air Group, reliable engines, spotless maintenance, 47 combat sorties without a major failure, extra tanks in the bomb bay for cushion. The Admiral's seat fitted left behind the pilot for the best view. A special mount held Yamamoto's family katana from the Momoyama era. The escort came from the 204th Air Group, combat tested over the Solomons. The 6 chosen averaged 500+ hours apiece. Among them, Petty Officer First Class Shoichi Sugita, later one of Japan's leading aces with 70+ before his death in April 1945, and Petty Officer First Class Kenji Yanaga, a 100-mission veteran honored to guard the combined fleet's chief. They had fought P-38s, P-39s, P-40s, and F-4Fs often. The Lightning's speed edge faded below 15,000 feet as compressibility and the Zero's power-to-weight took over. Its low-altitude turn circle was roughly twice a Zero's. Down low in a turning brawl, Zero pilots believed they owned every edge but armor and gun weight. At AO 725 local, 0525 Tokyo, on April 18th, Mitchell's P-38s began launching from Fighter Strip 2. The sequence was drilled to save seconds and fuel. Mitchell led, then his 3, then Lanier's killer flight, then the cover flights. Lieutenant McClanahan blew a tire on the roll, skidding off in coral dust and losing a wheel. Unhurt, but out. Lieutenant Joe Moore lost a drop tank transfer pump in climb and had to return. 16 Lightnings pressed on, too short. A razor edge now even thinner. Mitchell kept the group at 30-50 feet over the water to stay under Japanese radar. Salt spray filmed the windscreens within minutes. Hands wiped them clear. Radio silence held. Station keeping was by eyeball alone. Each pilot waged a private fight against monotony and fatigue. 2 hours and 5 minutes at wave-top height, forever nudging throttles to hold position, scanning gauges, fighting vertigo. The Pacific rolled beneath in endless rhythm, almost hypnotic. Some later admitted to drowsiness. Slaps to the face and loud singing kept them alert. Sun through plexiglass turned cockpits into ovens despite the slipstream. Lieutenant Roger J. Ames in top cover watched his fuel with unease. His drop tanks dragged more than expected, maybe a bad attach angle or factory variance. At this burn rate, he would land with 5 minutes in the cans. The math was cruel. Burn too much now and die at sea. Save too much and lack power in the fight. Prop, pitch, and throttle saw constant micro-tweaks as the Allison twins droned into a trance. At 0600 Tokyo time, or 800 local, 2 Bettys lifted from Rabaul on the 2nd. Yamamoto wore dress whites and full decorations, the Order of the Chrysanthemum and the Golden Kite, planning to impress forward area crews with Imperial Navy prestige. Witnesses said he seemed subdued, almost fatalistic. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, his chief of staff and close friend, rode in Betty 3 kayaks with staff. They climbed to 6,500 feet. The escorts took 2 neat 3-ship boxes. Visibility was excellent, with scattered cumulus at 4,000, 5,000 feet for occasional cover. Warrant Officer Kenji Yanaga scanned and drilled patterns. 3 years of combat had honed his senses, identifying types at distances others saw as flecks, catching motion at the edge of vision. This morning, he focused on perfect formation. The Rabaul to Balalai hop had been flown dozens of times without trouble. Americans had never reached this far north in strength. Operational mishaps seemed the only real risk. At 0934 local, Mitchell's formation hit the final time turn exactly on schedule. They'd been airborne 2 hours and 9 minutes on pure dead reckoning across empty ocean. Mitchell checked his synchronized Elgin against his plot. If his wind and heading math was right, the turn northwest for intercept was now. If not, the target was gone. He rocked his wings. 16 P-38s rolled together toward Bougainville. The timing was uncanny. They were 1 minute ahead of plan after 410 miles of open ocean nav with nothing but compass, clock, and IAS. Lieutenant Douglas S. Canning on Mitchell's wing was first to see them. "Bogies, 11 o'clock high," he called at 0934, breaking silence. About 5 miles away and 6,000 feet above, 8 aircraft, perfect formation, right where they should be. Mitchell felt the jolt, adrenaline and disbelief. They had found a needle in the Pacific haystack. 2 Bettys in echelon and 2 flights of 3 Zeros, blissfully unaware of 16 Lightnings climbing from below and behind. Mitchell ordered, "Skin those tanks, all flights, let's get them." The 165-gallon drops fell away as the P-38 shed drag. Throttles to war emergency power, about 475 horsepower per engine. Airspeed through 300, climb pegged near 2,800 feet per minute. The Killer 4 would strike. Mitchell pulled the cover flight higher to block any Kahili launch. Captain Lanier saw the escorts twitch. The Zeros had spotted the climb. Belly tanks off, turning down to meet them. Standard drill, intercept attackers and shield the bombers. Lanier made a snap choice that would spark decades of argument. Instead of staying with Barber for the bombers, he turned head-on into the diving Zeros. His stated logic later, clear the escorts, so Barber had a clean run. Critics would say he chased fighter kills over the mission's primary goal. Lieutenant Barber held course on the bombers as they pitched for the jungle canopy. The lead Betty shoved over into a steep dive, the pilot trying to drag the fight to treetop height, where lightning speed mattered less and foliage could hide them. Barber pushed into a 45-degree dive, IAS sliding past 400, range closed, 2,000 yards, 1,500, 1,000. At 500 yards, he fired everything. 4 streams of 50 and the 20mm raked the right engine and wing root. The effect was instant and fatal. Flame blew from the right engine. The spar looked cut. The bomber snapped left, out of control. Barber hauled to avoid a collision, the P-38 groaning under G, while the Betty vanished into green, trailing fire and pieces. A black pillar marked the crash. One down. But was Yamamoto aboard? Barber couldn't know. He hunted the second bomber. Holmes and Hine had followed his run but got split up in the churn. Holmes picked up the second Betty low over the sea, sprinting south along Bougainville's coast. Ugaki's ship chose the water instead of the trees, hoping the surface would block attacks from below. Holmes rolled in, but closed too fast. His long burst chewed the right engine, leaving a white stream of fuel and oil. Then he overshot, without a kill. Barber reacquired after Holmes's pass. The Betty was barely 50 feet above the waves, wounded and smoking. Barber set a deflection lead of about 30 degrees. His first burst walked up from the water in geysers and stitched into the fuselage. Skin plates peeled. Chunks slapped his lightning. The left engine lit. The pilot tried a ditching but hit hard at over 100 MPa. The airframe broke up. The fuselage tore free of the wings. Meanwhile, Lanier tangled with the escorts in a savage vertical scissors, using the Lightning's energy while the lighter Zeros tried to win the turn fight. Lanier would later claim a 0, saying he rolled inverted and fired into the wing roots until it blew. Japanese records, though, show none lost. With the bombers gone, Yanaga led the survivors in pushing the Americans away instead of trading to the finish, saving planes over revenge. Mitchell's top cover watched for a climb from Kahili, just 20 miles off. The expected swarm never rose. Surprise looked total, or the fighters were tied up elsewhere. He held 18,000 feet, ready to dive on any interceptors, while the Killer 4 turned for home below. The whole fight had taken under 10 minutes, maybe 3 minutes of real shooting. Now, everything hung on which bomber had carried Yamamoto. Now, everything hinged on which bomber had carried Yamamoto. Lieutenant Barber's Lightning had taken heavy punishment. Later counts found 104 holes, likely from the Betty's 7.7-meter Type 92 guns, and maybe a few from Zeros. Hydraulic lines bled fluid in thin red streaks. One Allison ran rough, debris or battle damage, but both engines still turned and the airplane stayed flyable. Barber set course for home, living on the gauges, temps, pressures, fuel flow, watching for any tremor that meant an engine might quit over 400 miles of hostile ocean. The ride back became a second test. Several pilots were on the edge of their fuel plan. Lieutenant Holmes had to pull power for engine trouble and drifted behind. Radio discipline mostly held. Temptation to coordinate was strong, but silence remained the rule. Each cockpit was its own math problem, remaining fuel versus distance and winds, a margin of minutes at best. Near the Russell Islands, roughly 200 miles out, choices turned stark. Lieutenant Hine saw his gauges drop into the danger zone. He could try Bonika's emergency strip and risk isolation with submarines reported nearby, or bet on the Allisons and run for Guadalcanal. He pressed on. Mitchell's navigation home proved as crisp as the inbound leg. The scattered lightnings drew together again as Guadalcanal loomed. At 12:30 local, Fighter Strip 2 appeared exactly where it should. Some ships landed on fumes. Holmes touched down with both engines coughing, tanks essentially dry. Others rolled in with under 10 gallons, maybe 3 minutes to spare. Triumph and disaster had been separated by a handful of gallons. Engines wound down, crewmen counted holes and checked leaks. The question burned in every face. Did they get him? Which wreck had been Yamamoto's? In the blur of firing passes, no one could tell. Intelligence would have to read the enemy's reaction. Waiting was its own torture. That evening, darkness settled over Guadalcanal's makeshift officers' club, scrap wood and captured odds and ends. Captain Lanier, quick to shape the story, began telling his version. He said he'd knocked down Yamamoto's bomber with a dramatic vertical reversal, rolling inverted and firing from above. That claim would have required him to be in two places at once, brawling Zeros and attacking bombers, and would shadow the mission for years. Barber, quieter, told a simpler tale, a straight, stern attack on the lead Betty. Japanese search teams reached the jungle crash the next day, April 19th. Wreckage lay 4 miles inland from Moila Point, near Aku Village on Bougainville. Lieutenant Commander Tabuchi Chiharu of the 26th Air Flotilla led the party. They found Yamamoto thrown clear of the fuselage but still strapped in his seat, composed even in death, white-gloved hand near his ceremonial sword. Dr. Tanaka recorded 2 gunshot wounds, one under the left shoulder blade exiting above the right eye, another through the jaw. Death was likely instant, consistent with Barber's opening burst. The shock inside the Imperial Navy was beyond measure. Yamamoto was not just an admiral, he was the living spine of Japanese naval thought. No one understood carrier warfare and combined operations like he did. No one inspired loyalty quite the same way. Captain Yasuji Watanabe, a staff officer badly injured in the second crash, later called his death a void that could not be filled. He had played shogi with the admiral the night before and said Yamamoto seemed unusually resigned. Japanese intelligence immediately suspected a code break. Hitting a moving target at precisely the right minute after a 600-mile approach in daylight did not feel like luck, especially exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid. But admitting compromised codes would mean a massive failure and force disruptive changes. Instead, Tokyo claimed he died while directing forward operations, keeping the fiction of routine combat rather than a targeted strike. American reaction stayed quiet for the same reason: security. If Japan connected the dots, the JN-25 advantage that helped win Midway and made this mission possible could vanish. President Roosevelt accepted the report with grim satisfaction, but demanded secrecy. Admiral Nimitz feared publicity would betray code breaking. For more than a month, the public knew nothing of Yamamoto's death or the American fighters who did it. The credit fight started the moment wheels touched down and would sour friendships for decades. Lanier pressed his claim aggressively. His tale grew over time. An extreme vertical reversal, inverted roll, fire into the wing root from above. That scenario defied timing and airframe limits for a P-38 in that melee. Barber's account stayed modest and matched the physics. A rear quarter attack on the lead bomber, then a separate pass on the second. Post-war interviews supported Barber. Warrant Officer Kenji Yanaga and other Japanese witnesses reported seeing a single P-38 come up from behind and below on the lead Betty, just as Barber described. The wound paths on Yamamoto matched shots from below and aft. Damage patterns in the wreckage fit nose-mounted guns firing from that geometry, not from above. The dispute lingered for years. Time magazine in October 1943 printed an article naming Lanier brushing dangerously close to the code story. In 1991, the Air Force split the official credit, half to Lanier, half to Barber, a political peace that pleased no one. In 2003, after deep dives into Japanese logs, crash evidence, and testimony, historians concluded Barber alone downed Yamamoto. Mitchell, whose navigation and leadership made all of it possible, received the Navy Cross rather than the Medal of Honor first recommended. Early leaks had angered Navy leadership. Every pilot on the mission got the Navy Cross, recognition for the risk and importance. Even so, many believed Mitchell's dead reckoning feat, finding a moving formation after 600 miles, deserved more than inter-service politics allowed. Operation Vengeance rewrote fighter lessons. Only the P-38 could have flown it. Range, firepower, speed, and twin-engine resilience to limp home when hurt. Concentrated nose gun smashed a bomber with instant effect in a way wing guns rarely could. Those takeaways fed the push for longer-range escorts like the P-51D. Japan's naval air arm never recovered from losing Yamamoto. His successor, Admiral Menechi Koga, lacked his reach and charisma and died in a crash the next March. Another blow. Strategy turned from coherent plans to desperate gambles. The decisive battle Yamamoto had sought never came. Instead, Japanese naval aviation bled out, most visibly at the Marianas, Turkey Shoot, and Leyte Gulf. The psychological shock ran deeper than tactics. Propaganda had cast Yamamoto as unbeatable, the master who would carry Japan to victory. His death cracked that myth. If even Yamamoto could be hunted and killed, what hope remained? Morale sagged and kept sagging as defeats piled up. The early victory disease yielded to fatalism. American code-breaking continued to tip the balance. Tokyo never truly admitted the breach, making small adjustments instead of a full overhaul. That blindness cost them dearly at the Philippine Sea, where U.S. fighters slaughtered Japan's air arm. Reading intentions turned defense into ambush again and again. The human cost touched the men who flew. Lieutenant Raymond Hine later went missing in action and never returned. Lanier left the service for politics and business, leaning on his disputed claim. Barber stayed, retired as a colonel in 1961, and only late in life pressed back as evidence vindicated his role. The mission had depended on rare cooperation. Navy codebreakers and analysts like Layton, Marine planners like Condon, Army Air Forces pilots executing the intercept. That joint approach, so often fragile in the Pacific, proved what unity could do and shaped doctrine well beyond the war. Yamamoto's absence meant more than a lost captain. He alone grasped the scale of American industry and will. His famous line, "Run wild 6 months, maybe a year, after that no confidence," showed he understood that Japan could not outlast the United States. Replacing him with men who believed spirit could beat steel only sped defeat. The date mattered. April 18th, 1 year after Doolittle, American fighters reached across an ocean to strike a single mine with surgical accuracy. The hunters had become the hunted. That knowledge crept into Japanese planning and slowed decisions with doubt. Technical analysis showed how narrow the wind had been. The P-38's range was stretched to the ragged edge. A 30-minute delay in the formation likely would have burned too much fuel searching. Minutes and gallons separated success from disaster. The lesson drove demand for even greater range and better fuel systems. Weather played a quiet but decisive role. Clear air at the intercept let them see at maximum distance. Scattered clouds on the return hid them. A tropical squall on any leg would have scrubbed the launch. On April 18th, the weather gods sided with the lightnings. Even a small wind shift could have ruined the timing. Tokyo's effort to hide Yamamoto's death showed its magnitude. For more than a month, statements still went out in his name. Only on May 21st, 1943, did they announce his loss, framed as frontline combat. A state funeral on June 5th drew vast crowds. Emperor Hirohito attended, an extraordinary sign of Yamamoto's stature. Part of his ashes went to Tama Cemetery, the rest to the family temple in Nagaoka. The American pilots carried mixed feelings. They had killed a respected foe, a man many considered a genius who had tried to steer Japan from war. Yet he had planned Pearl Harbor and was a lawful target. The ethics of targeted killing, even in wartime, troubled some for years. Intelligence officer Edwin Layton, who pushed for approval and had met Yamamoto at pre-war functions, later admitted to conflicted thoughts. Yamamoto's realism made him dangerous, but removing him would save American lives. War demanded such bargains. Technology made the strike possible. Code-breaking, long-range fighters, precise navigation, but human skill made it real. Mitchell's dead reckoning, Barber's gunnery, the crew chief's perfectionism, those turned capability into success. That blend of machine and mastery would mark American operations across the Pacific. Post-war records showed how close failure lurked. If Canning hadn't seen the formation when he did, they might have sailed past. If Barber hadn't stayed on the diving Betty, Yamamoto might have melted into the jungle. If Holmes hadn't hurt the second bomber, survivors might have told Tokyo the truth about the code. Every link held, barely. Squadron paperwork made the margins plain. Fuel logs showed several airplanes exceeded planned burn and got home on favorable winds and careful engine handling. Ammunition tallies put Barber at roughly 70% expended across 2 passes. Maintenance notes listed major damage across multiple lightnings, proof of how intense those few minutes had been. Strategically, removing Yamamoto also removed the one man who might have argued for realistic peace terms as tides turned. Without his voice, Japan's path bent toward longer, bloodier fighting. The kamikaze waves later reflected the hollowed strategy left behind. Weather charts for April 18th confirmed the rare window, visibility over 10 miles most of the route. Clouds scattered, not solid. Winds close to forecast. In the Solomons, that perfect day might come once in 10. The mission launched inside a brief opening that might not have returned for weeks. Credit for the opening belonged to hundreds of silent professionals, codebreakers, linguists, traffic analysts, working in sealed rooms from hypo to frupack. Their fame would never match frontline glory, but without them, the intercept would never have flown. The sword they forged was simply swung by the pilots. Crash site forensics underscored nose gun lethality. 450s and a 20mm in line created a roughly 30-inch cone of destruction at combat range. Inside it, structure, fuel, and crew vanished in seconds. No reasonable armor scheme could shrug off that kind of focused fire. The escort's failure showed a doctrinal flaw. The Zeros did exactly what training demanded: engage the attackers, opening a lane for Barber while Lanier tied them up. U.S. pilots would exploit that habit again and again. Nimitz's approval weighed risk against reward. A botched mission with losses could hint at broken codes. A leak could force Tokyo to rekey everything. But Yamamoto was unique. irreplaceable talent and symbol. History suggests Nimitz judged correctly. The planning process itself highlighted American strengths. Alternatives weighed, contingencies drafted, weather studied, fuel counted to the gallon. Thorough prep backed by flexible tactics became a signature of U.S. operations. The name Operation Vengeance captured national anger after Pearl Harbor. Yet pilots described little personal wrath. They flew a job with professional detachment. Revenge belonged to the strategists. For the flyers, finishing the mission and living to land was enough. By spring 1943, U.S. fighter work had flipped from mostly defensive to deep offensive thrusts. Better machines, sharper training, improved tactics, and growing confidence made raids like this feasible. Operation Vengeance left a broader legacy. It proved that individuals still mattered in industrial war, that precise intelligence could drive surgical strikes, and that tools meant little without people capable of using them well. Those lessons echoed from later Southeast Asia to modern counter-terror campaigns. In the end, it was American war-making at peak efficiency, superior tech guided by exact intelligence, careful planning executed with flexible tactics, individual excellence inside a coordinated team. That combination killed Isoroku Yamamoto, Japan's best hope for measured strategy. The Pacific War would grind on 28 more months, but the direction was set. April 18, 1943, began with 18 American pilots launching on a mission that looked impossible. It ended with Yamamoto dead in Bougainville's jungle, Japan's naval strategy reeling, and Allied victory in the Pacific more certain. The longest fighter intercept in history met its aim through planning, hardware, flying skill, and a good measure of luck. Operation Vengeance lived up to its name. Retribution for Pearl Harbor and the removal of Japan's most formidable military mind. 16 P-38 Lightnings came back to Guadalcanal that afternoon, having nudged the war's course. Their pilots flew to the edge of what their engines and bodies could stand, fought for minutes that mattered, and returned to tell it. In that brief slice of sky over Bougainville, they did what thousands of bombers and millions of rounds could not: cut out an irreplaceable leader with a single, precise stroke.